The bar was alive with the low hum of chatter, clinking glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter. Neon lights flickered intermittently across the walls, casting jagged shadows on the worn wooden floor. It was a Friday night at the Rusty Anchor, a place where locals came to drown their worries and strangers passed through, leaving brief traces of themselves. Among the crowd, Sarah Lane moved with practiced grace. She had worked at the bar for 3 years, her auburn hair tied in a tight bun, apron tucked neatly, eyes scanning every corner to ensure no one spilled trouble or beer. But that night, Sarah sensed something off. The air carried a tension that didn't belong. From the door, a group of bikers thundered in, their boots slamming against the floorboards, leather jackets creaking, chrome chains glinting under the dim lights. Among them was one man who didn't blend with the usual rowdy crowd. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved by scars and hard decisions, but his eyes held an unusual intensity. He walked straight to the bar without a word, the room's noise dimming around him as if the world itself acknowledged his presence. His name was Ryder, a man known in whispered legends across the county, not for crime, but for justice of a strange, uncompromising sort. Some said he was a former soldier. Others swore he had connections that no one could trace. Tonight, his focus wasn't on the bar or its patrons. His gaze fixed on Sarah, whose nervous glance met his, and then, in a swift, violent motion, Ryder grabbed her by the shoulders. The fabric of her uniform shirt tore under his grip, a sharp rip echoing through the bar. Gasps filled the air. Some men muttered obscenities, a few women shielded their eyes. Sarah froze, not from the rip itself, but from the fear that filled her chest, a terror she didn't understand. But what Ryder saw beneath the torn shirt wasn't the vulnerability he expected. It wasn't scandal, it wasn't shame. It was a scar, long and jagged, running from her shoulder down her ribs, a scar that bore the history of violence, of a life that had clawed itself back from the edge of despair. The bar went silent. Even the jukebox, which had been playing some muffled country tune, seemed to hush. Ryder's fist trembled, not with anger, but with recognition. Sarah's voice, barely a whisper, trembled. I didn't want anyone to see, not here. Ryder's eyes softened, but the storm in them didn't fade. You shouldn't have to hide, he said. Not anymore. It wasn't just a scar. It was a symbol. Sarah had survived a fire, an abusive boyfriend who had left her for dead, who had claimed everything she had. She had rebuilt herself brick by brick, night shifts at the bar paying for her small apartment, her life a patchwork of resilience and quiet defiance. And here stood Ryder, who understood what surviving truly meant, staring at the proof in the most shocking way imaginable. Before Sarah could recoil, Ryder stepped back and signaled to his gang. Give her space, he said, voice low but commanding. The bar's patrons were still frozen in a mix of horror and curiosity. This isn't what tonight is about. But the tension didn't fade. The air was thick with unsaid words. Ryder pulled a small worn envelope from his pocket and laid it on the counter. Your father, he left this for you, Ryder said, and for the first time, Sarah's composure cracked. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a folded photograph and a note. The photo was of her father, smiling warmly, holding a young Sarah in his arms. The note read, You are stronger than you know. Trust yourself and always fight for what is right. The bar seemed to exhale collectively. Patrons who had been ready to intervene in what they assumed was an attack now watched with rapt attention. Ryder wasn't there to harm. He was there to reveal truth. And that truth was heavier than any punch, louder than any insult. Who are you? Sarah whispered. You someone who knows what it's like to be invisible? Ryder replied. Someone who knows that people survive even when no one else notices. I was supposed to give this to your father, but he never made it. His jaw tightened and a shadow crossed his face. Tonight, I give it to you. You don't need to live in fear anymore. The bar slowly resumed its rhythm, though whispers lingered like smoke. Sarah clutched the envelope, tears sliding down her cheeks. She had never expected to find validation in a biker's hands, or to have the bravery to face her own history in front of a crowd. Yet Ryder's presence, though initially terrifying, had become a catalyst. Why the dramatic entrance? She asked, voice shaking. Sometimes the world needs to be shaken awake, Ryder said, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of his lips. A people hide behind comfort, behind routine, behind their judgments. You needed to be reminded that your story matters, that survival matters, and that fear can be faced head-on. it wasn't just a lesson for Sarah. The bartender, a stocky man named Joe, realized the dangerous assumptions he had made about the bikers. The patrons saw the courage in someone who had been pushed to the edge. Even the rowdiest gang member near the jukebox softened, sharing a nod with Sarah that said without words, "You are not alone." Sarah took a deep breath. "You spent so long hiding. I thought nobody could ever understand." That scar, she gestured to the jagged line across her torso. "It's a part of me I've hated." Ryder leaned against the counter. "And now, it's a part of your strength. Never let anyone make you feel ashamed of what you survived. That's the real fight." The night stretched on, but something fundamental had changed. Sarah felt lighter, braver, empowered by the very exposure she had feared. Patrons began to speak softly to her, some offering apologies for their stares, others sharing small stories of their own hardships. The bar, once just a backdrop for casual drinking and gossip, had transformed into a sanctuary, a place where survival, courage, and compassion could coexist. Ryder lingered only long enough to see Sarah reclaim her dignity. When he left, the door slammed shut behind him, leaving an echo of reassurance that wouldn't fade. Sarah sat at the counter, fingers tracing the scar, now not as a mark of fear, but as a symbol of triumph. In the days that followed, Sarah shared her story publicly for the first time. Patrons who had witnessed the night became allies. Local papers covered the biker who delivered courage, and Sarah realized that fear, once confronted, loses its grip. Her life, scarred but unbroken, became an emblem of resilience, not just for her, but for anyone who had ever felt invisible, ashamed, or defeated. And somewhere in the city, Ryder rode through the night on his motorcycle, chrome glinting under the streetlights, leaving a trail of justice, compassion, and unspoken lessons for those willing to listen. Because sometimes the world shakes you in the most terrifying way.